A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Respected brothers and sisters, welcome back to the After Maghrib podcast. Whether you're listening or whether you're watching on YouTube, it's a pleasure to be back here with you again. Hope you're doing well, inshallah. We've had some really interesting discussions, but today we want to talk about blind following, fake news and critical thinking. Do we believe everything we hear? Do we trust people too easily? Are we too gullible as a community, as a generation of followers of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam? And what about our predecessors? What about the time of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? How did he turn a community of people who were uneducated and ill-informed to a community of believers and enlightened souls? This is a fascinating discussion, a lot to unpack. But before we get into it, my beautifully eloquent co-host, Sayed Ali Radhawi. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
How are you keeping, Sayyid?
Alhamdulillah, I'm not sure about eloquence, but
No, mashallah.
I hope I make sense when I talk. Habibi, how you
You
doing?
always do. Alhamdulillah, I'm okay. Arba'in is fast approaching. So we are, I guess, in preparation. Whether we're here or whether we're in the Holy Lands, I guess it's important for us to be conscious of the importance of this blessed day, a blessed season. So yeah, just trying to make the most of it. And joining us today, brothers and sisters, we are very lucky, very honored to be joined by a dear friend, mashallah, a very, very eloquent person as well, our dear brother, Mohammed Ali Muraj. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Again, not sure where the eloquence comes from.
No, mashallah, you've been inspiring communities kind of around the world for the last few years. But your first time on the After Maghrib podcast, so thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here.
Thank you. And thank you for driving down as well. How's the journey to London?
For a Friday night, it was a very good journey. Empty roads for the M1, so alhamdulillah, can't complain.
Alhamdulillah. We seem to have a lot of love for the people of Leicester. Said Abdullah, who of course was in Leicester, he's a good friend of the podcast and was here a few weeks ago as well. And alhamdulillah, a lot of our other previous guests have either come from, so it seems there's a lot of Noor in your community. Now, this particular topic, in terms of thinking critically and believing critically, is something you and I talk about a lot as well, Sayyid. Why do you feel it's such an important kind of conversation to have?
So currently we're living in an age known as the information age, right? So we're surrounded by loads of information, loads of data, loads of idea. And in the mix, you have the social media. A lot of the news that we receive are from algorithms from TikTok and algorithms on Instagram and algorithms on Facebook, Twitter, etc. And these algorithms cater for you. So for example, in America, if you're a Democrat or if you're a Republican, these are how the algorithms will affect you. And these are the ways that you'll take on news. Similarly, if you're living in the UK, if these are your preferences, then the news that is fed to you is very, very personal, and it knows exactly what you want to hear. And in such an age where we're just full of information, at this point, just thinking a little bit openly, thinking a bit more freely, thinking analytically and critically becomes even more important. And now, for example, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, known as Abul Ahrar, the leader of the absolute free. And again, because of Arba'in approaching as well, this topic is quite apt as well in trying to follow the footsteps of Abba Abdullah and trying to be that free thinkers on how he and his grandfather tried to liberate his own society.
Because I think, say, we find a lot of time, especially we've, alhamdulillah, had the blessing and honor to work within media and Shia media specifically for a few years. So I think we kind of, maybe we're still on a journey, of course, but we understand that it's important that people are receiving the right form of communication and are shown the right kind of guidance on how to live day-to-day life. But it's definitely something that we think is important.
Yeah, no, I echo Brother Ali's words, and I think people can fall into this trap where they just see anything and just follow it blindly. And I'm sure if we go back in history, we'll see like previous uprisings or, meddling in political elections, things like that, where there is an effect of what is being put out there, because the reality is you can be on the ground.
Absolutely.
I'll give you one example, and I think many who have been ziyarah, Arba'in coming up, let's make this a reality.
Yeah.
What do you read and see about Iraq 24/7 on TV? Bomb, explosion, terrorism, etc., etc. Go to Iraq, go to ziyarah, you see nothing but love. Nothing but, safety. I feel more safe in Iraq than I do in the streets of Northwest London. Let me just tell people, but that's how the media works. You know, we are easily deceived. And I think this is the works of shaitan, to be honest. It's like an attribute of shaitan. You know how he deceives us as Muslims? Same way can happen when it comes to like
but do you think
media.
sometimes we can be innocently ignorant in the sense that we may be so blissfully ignorant about what's going on around us? Or is it a case where sometimes we believe things too easily, especially at the time, for example, you talk about the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A lot of people didn't believe in his message, but also you talked about, you know, the mission of Imam Hussein and his grandfather. People also changed, and people obviously took time. How easy is it to do that? And do you feel like sometimes we might be ignorant without even knowing?
I think you hit it on the nail when you said blissfully ignorant, because sometimes we're just happy with getting whatever information we receive without questioning it, without challenging it, right? And if TikTok or if Instagram tells me this is what it is, then I'll happily accept it rather than question the source, or why is it that he said so, or what is he trying to get at?
Yeah.
So I think there are two dynamics where I think potentially just happy to receive whatever we do, but it would also stop questioning it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the problem comes, where you're just being fed, for example, the media or the media of before. However it is, when people say something, I think there should be this question that comes in the mind: is it credible?
Yeah.
Right? Is it true?
Verify it.
Can I verify it? Exactly. And I think this is and it doesn't come naturally, right? We're kind of instinctively, you just accept whatever you've been given.
Built gullible. Is that the right word? Gullible. Yeah.
Potentially, right? And you just accept whatever you get. And it's all about practice to actually start cultivating this questioning mind. Yeah, for example, and I know, Sayed, you come from a very pure lineage, but if I was to take an example of myself,
We're Khojas.
Khojas, yeah. So many of the Khoja or people from the Indo-Pak are reverts into the religion. And shout out to all of the reverts, and I have friends that are reverts, and I have like huge respect for them, because they've actually
Studied.
thought about it, critically questioned what their forefathers had told them, and then chosen Islam as a religion.
SubhanAllah.
So, for example, our forefathers 8-10 generations ago were all Hindus.
Yeah.
Right? And they got to a point where they question themselves, actually, am I in the right path? Right? And to be able to do that takes a lot of willpower.
Yeah.
And just one person had to change, and all of these generations later, we've all kind of multiplied.
I was thinking about the same phenomena. I was speaking to my wife a few days ago about this. Why or how did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is it firstly, I don't know, maybe this is a question we can get into. Does that hidayah come from Allah, or do we have to search it? Maybe we can talk about that. But, you know, that courage and that brave act of that community leader for our community many generations ago, or that group of leaders, meant that for generations, now you have 300 plus or minus 1,000 Khoja people around the world. And bro, you've got people who are doing wilaya every day, you know, they're reciting verses of the Quran every day, and that is sadaqah jariyah that will continue to our forefathers, inshallah. May Allah
Khoja
bless
community
them.
do amazing work, by the way.
SubhanAllah, and you think that it all came down to one act of critical thinking, and it came down to the act of questioning, being brave enough to say, who am I? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And is there a better way to do things?
Absolutely.
I think one thing we need to kind of get into as well is when we talk about the phenomena of technology today and kind of journalism and media, something similar existed at the time of the Holy Prophet. So when the Rasulullah Muhammad came out, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and when he proclaimed Islam, he was proclaiming to a people then who were, as we say, people of Jahiliyyah. Now, today, we suffer from the journalism of the world, like you mentioned. And in those days, there was also journalism of those times. And people maybe received the wrong information, the wrong news about the Holy Prophet's mission. How did he kind of transform people who would, as you mentioned to me very eloquently, the people who worship gods made out of dates and then eat their gods, okay? People who would bury their daughters alive, as we hear so often. How did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring a prophet to these people? Why did he bring it to those people? And how did he change those people's mindsets from one thing to another?
Now, you see, the beauty of the Holy Prophet is that he knew his people at a personal level, at a community level, right? Now, as you alluded earlier, just imagine the people of Mecca, right? How much must a mind be stagnant for you, as you rightly put it, to create a god out of dates, worship it, and when you feel peckish, eat from that god, right? How must your mind be stagnant for you to revolve around the holy Kaaba naked? How must your mind be stagnant for you to bury your newborn daughters alive? How must your mind be stagnant for you to go into wars for the pettiest of reasons? Why? Because your tribal leader said so. You don't question it, right? And when the Holy Prophet came to those people, he understood them at a community level. And these are the people of Makkah, for example. They had a god for nearly every day of the year, 360 gods, right? A god of war, a god of love, a god of kids, a god of whatever, right? These are the people of Makkah. And then you had the people of Medina, for example, who most of them believed in the revealed religions of the previous prophets. Be it
There was a lot of Jews.
a lot of Jews, a lot of Christians, but you also had, for example, Zoroastrians and Sabians and other religions. Now, the problem with the Medinan community was that the religious people of the time, the priests and the rabbis, would use and abuse religion, right? What they would say is, they would say that this has come from God. And so the people would be confused and they would just bring things out from their own pockets. And so the religion would be split, the people would be split. And this was the problem of the people in Medina. They weren't able to critically think as to, is this what God wants me to do? Whereas the people of Makkah, like we said, were just intellectually stagnant, that they would bury their newborn daughters alive. And so this is where the genius of the Holy Prophet comes. And there's a very, very beautiful story that just shows the genius of the Holy Prophet. Now, before I mention this narration, I'd like to kind of put a disclaimer through.
Okay.
In the sense that it may come a little bit weird. Like, really? Is it authentic?
Yeah.
Now, and hence this disclaimer. This tradition is actually the basis of the fiqhi jurisprudence rule that we have, that you cannot obey the creation if it disobeys the creator. Right? For example, we all know this from our parents, that when it comes to our parents, we're meant to kind of obey them, except when it comes to disobeying the creators. For example, if your parent says, don't pray, then at that point, of course, you don't obey your parents. And there's a reason why I'm putting this disclaimer through. Now, this is the narration. The narration is that one of the tribes had recently converted into Islam, into the fold of Islam. So the Holy Prophet says very well, he sends an ambassador. And these are the people that the Holy Prophet really wants to get them to think a bit freely. So again, he sends an ambassador through and he says, here's a few instructions. He says, fine. So he goes, he looks at the village, he looks at the tribe, and he says, these are your instructions. Number one, dig a trench. So the tribe's like, fine, we'll obey whatever the Holy Prophet says, we'll dig a trench. Second instruction, collect brush or collect dry leaves, collect twigs, fill this trench with this brush. Fine, very well, they do that. Number three, fill it with fire. And now there's a huge inferno, a blaze raging. Fourth instruction, the Prophet says, jump into this fire. Allahu Akbar. Now here, you have a few people thinking,
Hesitant.
right, half the group is like, no, the Prophet says so, we'll do it, right? The other half, no, this can't be what the religion of Islam wants from me. This can't be what a merciful Lord, a merciful Prophet wants from me. And so there's a debate between these two groups of people. And the ambassador says, you have to make it unanimous. If one jumps, then all of you jump. If no one jumps, no one jumps. Fine. So then after a huge debate, they come to an agreement that fine, actually, we won't be jumping. Right? And this is the disclaimer why I said. So the ambassador comes to the Holy Prophet and he says, look, they refuse to jump into the fire. The Holy Prophet, according to the narration, says, if they had jumped into the fire, by Allah, they would have been raised with the fire on the day of judgment. Right? And this is quite different to the story of, for example, Imam Ja'far Sadiq, Harun al-Makki, Sahal al-Khurasani, where Imam says to Sahal that go and sit into the oven, right? And which is why I kind of put the disclaimer through. This is the genius of the Holy Prophet. The Holy Prophet knew for a fact that these are the people that will just follow their forefathers. The Holy Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter number 2, verse number 170 says that they would just follow their forefathers blindly. And so for the Holy Prophet to take them out of this thinking had to really push them to an extreme measure, right? And make them think for themselves that, is this what the Islam wants? right? And we have traditions from the Holy Prophet that says, look, if I say something, if a tradition comes to you in Mina, for example, I think in the Sermon of Mina, he states that if a tradition comes to you and it contradicts with the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, throw it against the wall. It's nothing that I have said. And this was the genius of the Holy Prophet, to take those people of Makkah with stagnant minds and just bring them to an extreme situation and get them to think a little more freely.
He did that, of course, through his methods of akhlaq and his methods of propagation. He embodied and exemplified all of the qualities that are needed to then present himself to people of ignorance and people of backwards mentality, such to get through to them. You know, when we talk about, I read something today, which was that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Musa alayhi salam to go to Fir'aun, he told him, approach him with kindness, speak to him with kind words. So, and this tweet actually, it was by a sheikh, he mentioned, so speak to your parents with kindness because they're not half as, or nearly as bad as Fir'aun. And that was, of course, with that context. But it even shows that even with dictators, the Holy Prophet approached them with a certain akhlaq and mentality. With people of ignorance, now I want to ask you, how do we approach them today? So we live in a day and age where we're surrounded by xenophobia, Islamophobia, racism, all sorts of counterproductive ideologies that conflict with Islam and its core values. When we're faced with things like that in a workplace or day to day, how do we approach that sort of scenario? Is there a methodology or a guideline on how we as followers of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam can conduct ourselves in such a way, not just as to incite the situation, but maybe even to educate through our akhlaq? Do you see what I mean?
No, absolutely. I think you hit it on the head when you said about the akhlaq. Because what we need to understand is there is an idea that we may agree with or we may not agree with.
Yeah.
But then there is also that individual, right? And when we separate the idea from the individual, we understand that, yeah, we may have disagreements with that idea. But as an individual, we're all creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you hit it on the head when you said, we still approach them with akhlaq, right? You never know, they may change. Like you mentioned, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks Musa alayhi salam, اذهب إلى فرعون إنه طغى, go unto Pharaoh, for verily he has transgressed. But at the same time, speak to him softly. Maybe he might change, right? Someone like Pharaoh, or for example, the Holy Prophet, where people had run away from the Battle of Uhud. Again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, speak to them with a gentle word, with a soft word. Maybe they are remorseful. And I think you've said it eloquently, that it all comes down to the akhlaq. You separate the idea from the individual, and you still approach the individual with utmost humility, humbleness, and with akhlaq. And that's personally my 2 pence.
You know, what can be examples in this day and age? Like if we have the examples of Fir'aun, Musa, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, how can we compare it to this day and age? Because a lot of people listening, they don't know about, you know, Pharaoh, Moses' story, things like that. They're just living about here and now and facing the reality of fake news, for example.
Can I add to that? Go on. Sorry, Sid, but I was going to say, like, the world we live in is very complex because we're very conformist to society. We live in establishments, we live in top-down systems, big pharma and big media, all of that stuff. So it's a very tactical and strategic approach that we're dealing with. So we work in a capitalist society because that's what we're born and brought up to do, and we live in a society that envisages us to live a life like that. So, like, when we talk about critical analysis for us today, we might just be scratching the surface of it, where we're thinking, oh, I'm doing a job that I don't like. Should I change my job? Like, bro, you're still thinking within the parameters that society's still giving us. Do you know what I mean? Like, but on a much deeper level. And why we're always told to understand and to learn about the dhuhr of the Imam. It's because the Imam, Ajallahu Ta'ala Fawaj Sharif, will inshallah come and just switch it up. You know, he'll change everything, he'll reform everything. And the idea is that we can envisage that world from now. And the only way we can do that is if we understand what we're living in. But I fully agree with you, like in that question, because that's something maybe we don't do enough of. Maybe we're not in the right frame of mind as a community of youth, or just generally to even approach it. So I would want to know as well, like where do we kind of begin today?
I recently read a journal article by Scriven and Paul.
Right.
And
I don't know who they are.
No, I didn't know them either. And they're university professors of behavioral and organization science. Okay. Right? Okay. They know what they're doing. So when I read that journal, they said that when it comes to kind of being able to question things, it's a collection of skills, a collection of habits that you got to start somewhere, but start very small.
Yeah.
And when I was reading that article, I was thinking to myself, that actually bodes in really well to kind of the guys that go to gym, right? When you start going to gym, you're not going to start with triple digits. You'll start from a really low number, double digit maybe, and build your way up. And similarly, what the researchers are trying to say is, actually, when you start to question things for the sake of questioning things, it's more like it's a habit that you develop. You start from small, like you said, scratch the surface, but you develop it a little bit further there and then, and just be a bit more analytical. Like, and this is an advice to myself, right? Okay. I need to kind of be a lot more critical. I need to be a lot more analytical when it comes to things. And when someone says something, how can I verify that information? And I just need to ask myself as much as I can, am I able to do the four-finger test of Imam Ali alayhi salam, right? And am I able to kind of verify whatever I hear from my ear and verify with my own eyes?
For those who are listening, who are maybe not seeing what you're doing visually, can you explain what the hadith is and what you're doing? So
once a individual comes to Imam Ali alayhi salam, asks him a series of questions. One of the questions was, what is the difference between truth and falsehood? Amir al-Mu'mineen, eloquently, as eloquent as he is, says 4 fingers, right? And he says the difference between 4 fingers is the difference between haq and batil. And he explains himself and he says that whatever you hear, you must verify with your eyes. Whatever news that comes into your ear, you need to verify the source itself. And so there's only 4 fingers between your ears and between your eyes.
So beautiful. And it's a reminder. We can do this all the time, you know?
Yeah. Something to think about. So that hadith, of course, is so important. Something we can do day to day. But you mentioned about us needing to do more critical thinking. Sayed, I want to ask you, do you feel it's dangerous to ask too many questions? Because of course we always
this was going to be my next question.
Really,
to the brother. And I was going to say, as you were saying, it's right. I know you have to be critical, and I think the Quran emphasizes that you sort of have to, think as well. Yeah, you don't just take things for granted. But sometimes if we keep asking questions, are we going to be led astray? For example, as it isn't shaitan going to overtake us with the questions we ask? Because sometimes we can ask, for example, is there a God? Or we can ask, where is God? It's like there's different. It can have the same meaning, but complete different. You'll get a different answer. How can we know we're asking the right question, or we have the right critical mind to the question that we're asking? Like, how can we ensure it's not shaitan and it's truly sincere from the heart?
And me being a student myself, not being an expert in the field whatsoever, and if I was to reflect this onto myself, I think one thing that I can be proud of, and that's personally, is the religion that we have is a beautiful religion that encourages questioning. Not many sects are able to encourage questioning. Some would be like, no, don't go into history. No, don't go into this book. I think we follow a religion, especially the sect, that not just gives you a right to ask questions, but to ask as a responsibility to elevate the status of our faith. And I know myself what my question is. If my question is mischievous and I know if I have an answer I need to get to already, then that kind of answers it for myself. But we follow a religion that actually encourages questions. And the beautiful story that comes to mind, and again, I'm going to quote a verse, and I think it's important for me to kind of give references, because I know our viewers in a topic known as critical thinking would like to kind of go and verify the information. So in Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter number 2, verse number 260, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the beautiful story of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, for example. Now, Ibrahim alayhi salam, he was a free thinker, right? Imam Hussein alayhi salam is known as Abul Ahrar. In Ziyarat Waritha is, Assalamu alaikum ya Waritha, Ibrahim Khalilullah, right? A inheritor of Ibrahim. Now, the beauty of Ibrahim alayhi salam is not only that we Muslims follow him, but Jews and Christians follow him. He's the father of monotheism. And he would ask people, he would encourage others to think freely. He would go to his village, break all of the idols, give the axe to the biggest idol. When the village comes back,
this is the first thing that came to my mind.
Exactly, right? And then he'd be like, why? Ask the idol, right? And they'd be like, no, we can't ask the idol. Then Ibrahim would be like, well, if someone can't defend themselves, how can you believe them? Or for example, he'd kind of follow the people that follow the stars as gods. And he'd be like, yeah, well, okay, fine, they guide us in the nighttime. But during the daytime, where are they? Can they really guide us? So this is Ibrahim encouraging others to critically think. But in answer to your question, where can we draw the line? if we go to that verse that I quoted, 260 of Surah Al-Baqarah, Ibrahim, in order to elevate the status of his own faith, his own certainty, asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a question. Oh Allah, how is it that you're going to bring the dead back to life? Allah says, قَالَ أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ, do you not have faith? Ibrahim says, no, I have faith, but I want to increase in my certainty. I want to increase in the faith that I already have in you.
The yaqeen.
In the yaqeen that I have, right? This is Ibrahim alayhi salam we're talking about, the father of monotheism. He has his yaqeen, but to go up a notch, he's asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help him elevate his own faith. So as long as, so this is again a reflection that I'd make myself, an advice to myself, that as long as my intentions are sincere, then whatever questions that I will ask will only lead me to the truth.
Well, I think we need to ensure we're asking the right questions, because I remember a time where, at the time of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, you know, when he famously said, ask me before you lose me, and someone asked him a question, you know, how much hairs do I have on my head? So we have to be clever on the questions that we want to ask. And inshallah, you know, being Shia, being the followers of the Ahl al-Bayt, we have the Quran and the Ahl al-Bayt. Inshallah, all our questions are answered in both of them. What do you think?
It's easy to fall into either side, well, to fall into the trap of asking for the sake of not knowing what that knowledge is going to do for you, or whether it's knowledge that you need or knowledge that can be acquired. Like we'll hear about sometimes topics on the minbar, or sometimes things which are maybe not of benefit to the people. Maybe it's not you know, people don't need to hear about topics which have been, you know, in controversy and dialogue for hundreds of years and now brought to the layman in the 21st century, because then it may spur on questions for an audience which may not be prepared for that and may put their belief into doubt.
One example.
Do I really need to get into this?
Yeah.
No, there are areas within religion which are contentious.
Okay.
Theological matters, okay? Fiqhi matters, whatever it might be. But people will, for example, bring them up. In my opinion, sometimes don't bring things up to an audience who hasn't studied, and when I say study, I mean extensively for a period of decades at times, you know. And even then, what's the purpose? What's the goal? Do you know what I'm saying? So if you're going to ask a question, I hope that the one who's brought that to you, to then, you know, the kind of the instigator of that question, understands that sometimes questions can be from a place of genuine curiosity and a yearning to learn, but sometimes can be a result of manipulation of a topic, or may not be like a correct introduction to a topic. And then, for example, outside of that, when we talk about our belief today, we are born and brought up with scholars that we listen to and speakers that we listen to, cultural practices in our local community centers, our societies at large, which we should question. I'm not saying culture is bad, but question your culture. Question, does this bring me closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Is it halal or haram? Is it mubah? Maybe. And at times you may be surprised the answers that you'll receive. And, you know, but at the end of the day, you know, Imam Ali says famously, alayhi salam, look for the truth, then follow those who adhere to the truth. Don't look for the people and then do they fit within my parameters and my definition of truth? You'll stay restricted with your limited ideology. So yeah, inshallah we can get to that. But it takes a very brave person, like you said, whether it's a revert or just anyone who's on the journey of enlightenment, to stand up and to say, am I doing the right thing? Am I praying the right way? Do I believe in the true religion? Is this practice I do in Muharram, or is this practice I do in Ramadan, or is this practice I do after my salah? Whatever it is these correct things for me to do? Will it bring me closer to God? Am I doing it with actual pure recognition of my actions or not? So yeah, like when you apply it to today's day and age, it's definitely hard, but it's definitely needed as well.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree with you.
Well, isn't it the job of scholars to ask these questions?
To us?
Huh?
To ask questions to us?
For example, you gave the example of,
of course,
sitting down under the pulpit and hearing.
Yeah. But
bro,
that's
what they're saying.
Let me give you an example, if you don't mind me saying. Yeah. I'm not gonna. If I'm in a, what is a jurist? What is a scholar? There are people who have specialized in a certain field of education or theory for decades. Okay, or presumably, you get to a certain level, you specialize in an industry. That's your field. Okay. In the same way, if I'm studying under a lawyer or a judge, if there's usually you have a circle of judges who are discussing high level contract law and constitutional rights and this and that, and things which are way above my understanding. I might be a first year student of law. We talked about law before the podcast, but I might be someone who's just got an interest in law in the same way a lot of us haven't studied Islam, but we have an interest in it. Am I fit to sit in a room with judges who have studied a certain text or a manual for decades, and for them to bring something to my attention which I don't even know where to begin to understand this? It would just bemuse me. It will baffle me. Yeah, I'm not in that position. If I'm a football fan, and I think, Liverpool should spend 110 million on Caicedo, not 20 million on Endo, like we did, because we're a crazy run football club. But
then your
nonetheless,
critical thinking kicks in.
right? So exactly, yeah. But then if I sit in a room of financial directors, I don't know the ins and outs, the intricacies of details. So I do think it's the job of scholars to ask questions, but within the right circles. And I think our responsibility as listeners is to ask the right questions to our scholars, questions that are relevant for our youth and even for our elders. Maybe I'm being unfair. I don't know.
No, I like the example you gave, and I think I will agree with it when it comes to, for example, history, things like that. That's when you can question sort of things. But it's like aqeedah and things like that.
Yeah.
Who am I to question these things? Yeah, if we have scholars and they've spent their life work into this field, I think we should honor them and respect them for the work they do.
Bro, the scholars.
I'm not saying we don't respect them in your example.
Yeah.
I don't think we are in a position to question them.
We're not ready. I say this generally speaking, but maybe our community generally, we're not as advanced as we should be intellectually. Maybe we need that intellectual advancement to get to a stage where we can engage in such discussions. But that comes only as a result, like you're saying, of critical analysis, critical thinking. Ask the right questions, we'll then be prepared for more surprising answers and more guiding answers.
Shall I tell you what is the worst question in this day and age?
Go on.
What is a man and what is a woman? Well, that's a conversation for another day. Do you get the drift? Yeah, that's the sort of questions people are asking now, and it tells you where society is heading. Yani if people are questioning these sort of things, that's why I'm going to relate it a bit to aqeedah. If people start questioning what is a man and what's a woman, bro, you're going to end up going to places you don't want to go, because you're going to go against what society really is, what Allah's laws are. So I think we've got to be careful there.
Yeah. Well, what do you think, Muhammad Ali, about this point?
No, I think you started a very kind of interesting sub-discussion on what happens when, as listeners or as scholars, how do we engage with the two? And I think I must admit, it's very important to understand the audience that's sitting there, first and foremost, are very intellectual in their own ways. You have loads of professionals sitting there, many students of the religion, many wishing to learn more of the religion. But at the same time, you've mentioned that a judge might discuss something. He may say a sentence, but for the first year student, he may not know where to start.
Yeah.
And scholars between themselves would have disagreements. And that's where the critical thinking comes.
And that's beautiful.
And that's the beautiful thing, because the more...
Al-Kharij, is that what you're referring to?
Well, absolutely. Yeah. Like, even if you take the Sheikh Suduks and Sheikh Radhis,
dialogue between the classical scholars, it never ended.
Absolutely.
That's gorgeous.
Yes.
That allows progression and advancement of our
exactly, and getting closer and closer to the truth. So the idea is that, obviously the audience is quite intellectual, but as a scholar, you kind of try and understand at which level to pitch it, and which format as well. A Q&A might be a better format sometimes, in order to be able to open that discussion, where if I'm going to be adding something that's quite contentious, then maybe a Q&A forum will be a better suited forum where people can ask me at length.
So you've spoken to communities in the East and the West, okay?
Yes.
And you've been lecturing now for a few years, alhamdulillah. And mashallah, for those who don't know, please tune in to Muhammad Ali's lectures. Mashallah, he's one of the most exciting up-and-coming speakers in the West. And
you're being too kind.
We're really honoured to
Do you have a YouTube channel?
He will after this.
How can we find your lectures?
I must admit, I when I was in kind of college or something, I started a YouTube channel then, but I think I've lost my credentials back then. But many of the communities that I lecture at, they upload stuff under my name. So they upload the majority.
But when you visit a community, okay, you've spoken in India, if I'm not mistaken?
I have volunteered in India.
Right, okay, fine. So you visited communities in the East and in the West. Now, when you visit such communities, or let's say you're speaking to an audience, what goes through your mind as someone who then holds the key to the next hour of what these people hear? Dozens of people. What goes through your mind in terms of preparation?
So there's two ways I approach this. Firstly, I try to do that with many of the communities I go to, especially for Muharram. Given that I understand that this is a community that I may not have gone to before, so I'd ask the president, I ask a community member that, what are the topics that are really kind of needed, right? And they kind of suggest a couple, and from the experience that I'd come, for example, of already visiting a couple of communities, I'd realized that maybe these are also the topics that may be quite relevant to discuss. And I'd try and kind of match the two together and come up with a topical kind of majalis. And don't even get me started on preparations. It starts well months before Muharram, for example.
MashaAllah.
So I think personally that's how I approach it, and there's different scholars that approach it different ways. A lot more experienced scholars as well, that they'll just know exactly what the issues of the community, of the society are. And from my side, I try and kind of ask if I can get a deen as to what it is.
Interesting. And maybe, like, I mean, do you feel that there's ever backlash? So when you bring up something, a topic, or even an approach to a topic, let's say you're talking about something basic, music is haram, for example. It's not basic at all when you think about it, because there's so many ways to construct it. Let's say you're talking about something basic, prayer 5 times a day, right? But the way you encourage people to critically analyze that topic, maybe in such a way where people may take offense, if I'm not mistaken. Have you ever experienced that? And how do you deal with it?
Absolutely. And why, and this is one of the reasons I kind of gave a disclaimer before mentioning that narration, is in a majlis format, sometimes when you mention something, it's easy to make yourself available during tabarruk, right? And that's where the kind of audience will come. And that's where the main majlis happens, by the way. Right? The main majlis happens after the main majlis. And those are the discussions that I actually enjoy. Because then it actually makes you think as well from the other's perspective. And I'm not talking about aqidah, but something different, where an individual may have a different perspective of life. And they'll kind of come approach you. You don't know them, they don't know you. And it'll be a very open-ended conversation. And those kind of are quite enjoy and quite nice. And I'd encourage those that are kind of members in the community, if there is a visiting speaker, and definitely approach them after tabarruk and try and kind of build a relationship with them, because on night 1 you might just be able to say salams to them, but by night 5, night 6 you'll be able to kind of make that relationship and be like, that point that you mentioned, could you tell me a little bit more? And chances are those conversations are so much more powerful.
I have a question for you, Sayed Ali. Do you think our communities generally should be more open and encouraging for people to ask questions? Because sometimes those who ask questions might be labelled as becoming misguided or going down the wrong path, or do you know what I mean?
No, I think communities should be open to this. And you mentioned Q&As a bit earlier on. When I was young, believe it or not, I used to love Q&As more than the lecture.
Really?
Because half the time, whoever will ask the question is the question I had. Because we're all like, similar thinking, similar minds, similar upbringing, similar aqidah, everything. We have the same questions, but sometimes we're just too shy. And I think if a community facilitates the opportunity for its, members who are present at the majlis to stay behind and have a Q&A, wallah, we will answer so much questions the community has. Because sometimes we may have a question we're shy to ask our parents. Sometimes we may have a question we're shy to speak with our friends, our colleagues, whoever it is. But when you're in the right place, at the right time, and that's in a mosque, in a Husseiniya, with an alim, who else would you ask the question to? You would learn so much. And gain so much. And share so much knowledge.
Usually that informal environment is good. That's really why on the podcast, we try and be semi-informal, semi-formal, and those who've been following us for a while will notice, like, we've had, mashallah, people of different ilks, different types, and I mentioned to you before the podcast, right? People of different ideological backgrounds, different cultures, different age groups, personalities. We've had, mashallah, ulama who've studied for decades, and we've had some of the youth join us on the podcast. But I think it's very important to have a diverse range of experiences to contribute towards a communal discussion. Only then can you progress as a community, because otherwise you are not representative of communities at large. So maybe we're getting a bit waylaid, but I think it's very important, like, to focus on the fact that we are all individual human souls with ambitions and challenges and problems and perceptions and experiences, and community at large is trying to progress forward. So maybe we have to support each other and we have to educate one another. How to do that is obviously the hard part. So yeah.
What's been some good questions people have asked you?
You're
that question's amazing.
Actually.
Yeah.
You'll have to give me a moment and
Okay.
let me think.
I'm going to ask you a question then, Sayed.
I told you you're the king of questions.
Yeah, bro, I can churn them out. I can churn them out. I've got a question for you, yeah? Of course, Arba'in is approaching, and of course, we're remembering in this season that we reliving Yom al-Ashur, when Imam Hussein alayhi salam and his companions and his family were brutally slaughtered, martyred on the plains of Karbala. I want to ask you, in that moment when the companions of the Imam were going out, is there a companion which comes to your mind as someone who critically thought what happened around them, maybe thought about what am I doing the right thing, and then made a decision to go forward and join Haqq?
I love the question, but can I answer it differently?
Yeah.
There is a point, there's a time in Ashura where Abul Fadl Abbas, alayhi afdal salatu wasalam, when he goes to the water, to the river, and when he picks up the water in his hands, and for that moment he thinks, how can I drink? And Hussein is thirsty. Those sort of moments when you think, or even, before, I think it was at the time where Imam Hussein set camp, in Karbala, there was a time where they had access to water before it was blocked off from them, where Imam al-Hussein actually went to the water with his horse. He was about to drink, and he was like, for a moment he was like, my horse is thirsty. Let my horse drink first, and then he'll drink the water. Yani, those sort of moments from Karbala it tells you, you gotta think, you need to be in the right state of mind to have those sort of questions that come to your mind. Because someone else would just drink it. Who cares? But you have to have and live like and feel Imam al-Hussein and learn from Imam al-Hussein to start having these right critical thinking way of mind.
I think you might know what I'm thinking of when we talked about companions, but the story of Hur is something which really strikes me as a classical example of critical thinking.
A general of an army.
Yes, the general, the commander of one of the flanks of Umar ibn Sa'd alayhi, and how in the build up to the day of Ashura, he blocked the Imam, and he knew the Imam, his maqam, and he asked the Imam to lead Salah. He knew this is the son of Fatima Zahra, salamullahi alayha. And when he sought forgiveness from the Imam, he went through that battle, that internal battle, that jihad internally. And then, of course, we hear he turned his armor around. He thought about that. Why turn your armor around? Because then it's obvious your front side is unprotected and you're heading towards the Imam. You're saying, if you want to attack me, I'm not here to fight you. That's why I'm coming
with the white flag.
Exactly.
That example, yeah.
He lowered his head. He approached the Imam. He said, you are the son of Fatima Zahra. I ask for forgiveness. But he thought that we talk about courage in that moment, like there was courage, pure courage. And that's why the Imam said, your mother named you free. You're a free man. And it's I think that is a great example. And something, Hud was not ma'soom.
No, it's a powerful example.
Yeah.
In the last moment.
Yeah.
And that's just, wow.
Yeah.
And his thinking was Jannah and Nar. He saw himself between heaven and hell, subhanAllah.
Is there any other examples that you can think of or anything that strikes you?
And well, the point you mentioned about Hur, the beauty of the story of Karbala is the entire journey of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and we're obviously approaching his Arba'in, was one that encouraged critical thinking. Right? There's the people of Sham just agreed to whatever Muawiyah and Yazid of the time would say. And then there's Imam Hussein alayhi salam rising against the status quo, rising against the tide. And even to the build of Ashura, not only would he have negotiations with Umar ibn Sa'd, etc., but on the day of Ashura, before the battle commences, he spends hours upon hours talking to the army there and saying, look, and he asks them in one of the beautiful sermons of Imam Hussein alayhi salam is that he asks the people that, do you know of anyone that is a grandson of the Holy Prophet in the East or the West? Think about what you're about to do. Think of the pros and cons. And he speaks to the people of Iraq specifically. He's not even talking to the people of Sham at that time. He's saying to the people of Iraq, just think about what you're about to do. You're the ones who've invited me. Have I ever killed anyone from your people? And towards the other, a famous line is, if you don't have any religion, if you do not fear in the day of resurrection, then at least be free men. Right, and it's not just Janabi Hur alayhi salam that converted to the camp of Imam Hussein. There were so many other people that converted and went to the camp of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And the beauty of the message of Imam Hussein alayhi salam is that it continues to encourage us to critically think about our status quo and about our mindsets up until today. I think that's the beauty of how Imam Hussein alayhi salam just propagated the way he did.
And Imams alayhi salam, his initial mission from beginning until his final moment was objective truth of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He talks about the reformation of the deen of his grandfather Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And when he talked about to Muhammad ibn Hanafiya, we talked about this at the beginning of Muharram, about the encouragement. He says, I'm not going to take up arms, I'm not going for entertainment or play, I'm going to reform the deen of my grandfather and to reform the community of my grandfather. And the Imam, his whole mission was that. And even when we talk about the sermon of Sayyidah Zainab, the sermon of Imam Sajjad, both in Kufa and Sham, in both instances, in both locations, these sermons were given with the intention to allow reflection for those around, because people at the time didn't know what was happening in Karbala. We're talking 2-3 days after Ashura, they arrived in Kufa. At that point, people and they're not going to know what's the latest news. A week or 10 days after that, they were in Sham. At that point, people in Sham are not going to know. And when Imam Sajjad said, we talked about this in the Imam Sajjad alayhi salam podcast, and he says to the people, who are these verses about? Verse of Wilayah, Ayat Tathir, all of this stuff. He says, we are Al Muhammad. And he's asking them, reflect on it. All the majalis that began from Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam, even Bibi al-Banin, when she was afar, she was still conducting these majalis. And the whole concept, the origin of majalis was reflection and also the emotion. They go hand in hand in this season. Inshallah, we can be amongst the followers of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and we can yearn to find enlightenment through our thought process as well as our action. That's very important. Is there anything you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Well, I wanted to kind of go back to your back to your questions. And may Allah bless the community of Australia. And it kind of reminds me a majlis that I recited, and I actually mentioned the same narration. That I'd given so many disclaimers right at the beginning of our kind of podcast.
Mushtaba removed the disclaimer.
And I think at that point, the community, kind of one or two individuals came and kind of gave me the examples of Sahal Khurasani, Imam Ja'far Sadiq, and kind of, but this is what we have in our books. And I had to kind of explain to them that we also have this in our books that shows the genius of the Holy Prophet. And kind of just how the Holy Prophet brought people to the centrality of their faith, for sometimes taking people to the extreme and just pushing them to think freely.
What community was that in Australia?
The Sydney Community Imam Hassan Centre.
Wow, they sound like very smart individuals.
Very, very smart individuals.
Deep level stuff as well.
Absolutely. May Allah continue to bless them and all of the communities around the world.
Ameen.
What's one question that comes to your mind?
Oh, you know me, I've got questions upon questions. What do you mean? Questions?
Something that's critical, like if you were in that scenario. I'm going to give you a better scenario. Let's say you're sitting right now beside Zemin and Sayyid Ali Sistani. What is one question you will ask him?
I'm not going to ask him a football question for sure. God, I really don't.
Because when you're next to certain personalities or certain environments, you have to ask the right question.
I think when you're amongst, to put me on the spot, it's hard to say. I'd probably need a month to prepare.
No.
Yeah,
really.
Probably I'd ask for advice. I wouldn't probably ask him.
What would your question be?
I wouldn't know. Because
you could ask him anything, but what would be the point of wasting a question? Like you said, when the man told Imam Ali, how many years have I got in my head? Bro, what's going through your mind? You illiterate guy. You know what I mean? You'd ask the Sayyid, respected Sayyid, something which is of value, and potentially, to be honest, I would ask him for advice and let him say what he feels is best. Maybe I'd tell him about my a very, very, very brief summary of me, and what would you advise me? How to be
advice
a good
for the After Maghrib podcast.
Yeah, no, I don't even know that's one. How to be a good father, how to be a good mu'min, how to be a good husband, how to be a good son.
That's nice.
You know what I mean? Just advice, maybe. I don't know. What about you?
I don't know, to be honest. I don't know. I can't think on the spot.
We'll use one each. We'll share them.
Okay, come back to me.
What about you, Muhammad Ali?
I think, unless if I'm going through at the moment, I think leaving it open
Yeah.
at that instant.
Leave it to him. He's the pro.
Yeah, let him advise us, and generally when you go, it's got so much wisdom, and he'll say something and you'll be like, you know what, that actually relates.
Have you met
to my
Sayed?
life. Alhamdulillah,
Yeah.
I have. And every time you meet him, he always gives du'as for the people living in the West. And he appreciates the challenges that people in the West face may not be faced by people of the East, and he gives us loads of du'as. And I think that's really beautiful to see from him.
Yeah.
That how he appreciates us holding on to our faith and our religion in by living in the West.
May Allah prolong his life and
Ameen.
protect all our maraja.
Ameen.
Inshallah. Ameen.
Mohammed Ali, thank you so much for joining us and for blessing us with your
Been
wisdom.
an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for
proved,
having me.
You proved yourself wrong and you proved me right. You are, mashallah, eloquent, and you are, well,
Ahsant.
you're an example of eloquence, mashallah, for our
I
youth.
think you're being too kind.
Not at all.
But it's been a pleasure to come
you,
to the
bro.
After Maghrib podcast. I think yourselves as the hosts, but also the wider team in the background are doing amazing things, and may it long continue,
It's
inshallah.
the amazing guests that make it this.
Yeah.
Make this
No, of
happen.
course.
Trust
No,
me.
you have
mean-
amazing guests as well. But of course, it comes from the organizers, the hosts, the producers of the show, and a lot of the work that goes in the background as well. To shout out to everyone that contributes.
Thank you, bro.
Ahsant.
In the
If
background
you want
as
to
well.
support the podcast, anyone at home, we are always here as well. We are continuing to try to work hard, and we are looking for your support. It could be through your suggestions, it could be through your support towards the cause and what we're trying to build here as well. But whatever you, inshallah, want to engage with, we are all ears, inshallah. We always have time for you. But before we wrap up, I wanted to thank you again. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to grant you knowledge, rizq, and the opportunity to continue to visit communities, to learn more and to also educate more, inshallah. And hopefully we'll have you on again.
Ameen, inshallah. Thank you.
It'd be an honor. Thank you so much. Sayyidina, anything to add?
Nothing to add apart from, I think, keep your thinking hats on. You know,
like that.
be in that critical mindset and ask the right questions, and inshallah you'll get the right answers. But I have a question for you, wherever you're watching or listening, is have you booked your Arba'een Ziyara tickets?
I thought you said
If not,
subscribe.
and you haven't had the opportunity to do so, now is the time, inshallah. And pray for us that we can all be there
I thought you were going to say have you
beside the
subscribed.
shrine of Imam al-Hussein
Yeah.
and Abu Fadl Abbas. But more importantly, do subscribe to the podcast, give us a like,
Send it.
leave us a comment. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.